Hey YouTubers, this is the GSTV viewer coming at you with another installment of my GSTV Obscurities. Now, a couple years back, I did a video as part of my TV's Forgotten Gems series where I discussed about a particular sci-fi show that I watched growing up, which was called So Weird. And basically, I want to take this opportunity to kind of go back and sort of revisit that at least one last time. I know I revisited like on a couple of occasions, like in 2010, where I talked about the show. But at the time when I uploaded that video in 2010, this was back when YouTube had the 15-minute limit, so you couldn't upload videos past the 15 minutes. So it was a pretty condensed analysis on my thoughts on that particular show. So I ended up deleting that video. And then 2013, I happened to revisit that TV show once again, but trying to provide a little more analysis on the show, since by this point, YouTube, you were able to upload videos past 15 minutes. But while I did have good intentions making that video, I watched the video for the first time in a couple years. To be honest, I just kind of felt the overall presentation could have been a lot better executed. At the time I uploaded that video, I happened to use a different audio equipment where I used a hands-on microphone as opposed to the headset microphone that I'm using at this moment. So whenever I uploaded a video from my Windows Movie Maker and put it on YouTube, it's like you could hardly hear my voice. So you will often have to uh, raise the volume to the highest that you could get on the YouTube player. So that was a criticism that I got as far as from my feedback. So, a couple years after that, I mean, I discovered a So Weird message forum that's devoted to fans of the particular show. And I actually came across a thread, with a series of topics where they post a URL link on some of the users that have discussed So Weird on YouTube. So I actually came across that video, and as far as some of the feedback that I got from the message forum, and I really appreciate the honest feedback, whether it's positive or negative. I mean, I really, appreciate that there are people that are actually watching my videos and giving out their thoughts on the video and the TV show as well. But I just kind of felt like I came off too over cynical, especially when I was discussing briefly about Disney Channel and being the typical nostalgia tar, just talking about how Disney Channel sucks and yearning the old days and how the new day sucks and it's not the same as it used to be that you would see on a lot of YouTube videos. So I want to try my best to kind of stray away from that formula and try to come across a little more professional and a bit understanding as far as the show's content is concerned. And also, I just want to kind of, expand upon some of the information that I've read from various articles, and reading people's thoughts on the show, and even some of the episodes, going from emphasize, breaking it down, and just analyzing some of these episodes, and really, give out their overall thoughts on each particular episode of the show. So I'm really glad that there's actually a fan base out there, even if it's a very minimal fan base. But I'm really glad that there's actually fans of this particular show, and I still do think that this show deserves a little more credit as far as the whole lineage of Disney Channel's original programs over the past 15 or 20 years. However, how long it's been since Disney Channel started cranking up with a lot of their original programs. So, nevertheless, this will be hopefully my last revisiting of my So Weird retrospective video. Since it's been hard to believe it's been nearly 15 years since this show had ended, and as the cliche saying goes, just how time flies, and it just feels like yesterday that this show appeared on my television screen. Kind of a bummer that Disney Channel doesn't show it in reruns in some form. I'm just kind of glad that there are episodes out there that you can watch online. I know Disney kind of took down some of the episodes on YouTube that used to be on here for several years, and you have to go through other websites in order to watch it. But just basically what exactly is So Weird? This particular show centers around a lead protagonist named Fiona Phillips. She happens to be this 14-year-old girl who encounters a series of paranormal activity while traveling across the road with her brother Jack, and, as well as her mother Molly. Now, Molly happens to be this aspiring musician, previously toured in a rock group called the Phillips Kane Band. She played alongside her best friend and guitarist John Kane, as well as her husband Rick, who unfortunately one day was killed after what was believed to have been a car accident. So as a result, the Phillips Kane band subsequently disbanded as Molly spent the next several years continuing to raise her two children. So as Fiona and Jack started to grow up, it was around that same time where Molly begins to express interest in making music again. So she prepares this big comeback tour now as a solo artist. So they're accompanied by the Bells family with Irene and Ned, and they happen to be raising two sons in Clue and Carrie. Now, Carrie wouldn't appear on the show until season two, but we'll get to that, as the video progresses. The two families they end up going on tour together. Ned serves as the tour bus driver, and Irene serves as Molly's touring agent. So they're going all across the country, while Molly gets these sort of gigs. So every time they go somewhere, across the United States, it's like often than not they would encounter all sorts of unusual activity that's going on around them. And often than not, Fiona would normally take notice of this and starts undergoing investigation on what's going on and why such and such is happening. It's a common theme for throughout So Weird's run is that they would often find something that's unusual, but Fee would have to figure out what's going on. Interacting with some of the people and why such and such is happening and what they could do to stop it. And because this show also incorporates a lot of supernatural elements, since this is clearly a sci-fi show, they would often encounter mythological creatures taken from famous urban legends or folklore, including stuff like werewolves, ghosts, angels, demons, vampires, banshees, and so forth. Often than not, the main cast would often see these sorts of unusual stuff that's going on, a lot of superstition. But unlike Fee, the rest of the family aren't into the paranormal stuff the way that Fee sees it. Um, so throughout the first two seasons, Fiona investigates all these sorts of paranormal activity while simultaneously learning the truth about the circumstances surrounding her father's untimely death. So by the time you get to the third season, Fiona leaves her family behind to spend time away with her aunt. Fiona would be written off the series indefinitely, or at least the actress that played Fiona Phillips, and she would be replaced by another aspiring musician, Annie Thalen, who takes over as the lead protagonist until the show's ending in 2001. So as far as my thoughts on So Weird, so where exactly do I begin? Now, when So Weird premiered on the Disney Channel in January of 1999, just a bit of a history lesson. This was, Disney Channel had around this time had been a premium-based cable network. Much like what you see with channels like HBO, Stars, Encore, Showtime. Disney Channel was actually, at one time, was part of a subscription-based service. So normally if you wanted to try to watch the Disney Channel, you would normally see like this sort of blank screen that's presented in scrambled form. And you would have to call your cable provider or satellite provider in order to gain access to that channel. Even in Disney Channel, especially during its earlier years, it was actually a network devoted to a lot of the content that was produced by Walt Disney during his heyday. They will also show some contemporary specials like Walt Disney Presents, Inside Pooh's Corner, uh, the Ink and Paint Club, the Mickey Mouse Club, Kids Incorporated, and a bunch of other content that was featured on the Disney Channel around that time frame in the 80s and even the early mid 90s. And they even also showcase a couple of cartoons from the Disney in the afternoon days with, Aladdin, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck. I believe they might have played Gargoyles at one point, but since that was part of the Disney in the Afternoon. So then we get to 1997. Now, 1997 was actually a pretty big year for Disney Channel, especially coming close to its 15th anniversary since the network's launching in 1983. So at that time, the Disney Channel started to make a slow but gradual transition from a premium-based network to a more basic cable television. So to coincide with this change, Disney Channel started to, change the logo and even introduced us to the Disney Channel original movies, shortened abbreviated into its acronyms DCOMs that Disney Channel would air ever since. So it really kind of goes to show you just how successful the Disney Channel original movies have been over the past almost 20 years, hard to believe. So also along the change, you also had the introduction of two blocks. In the mornings, you had Playhouse Disney and Vault Disney. Now, Playhouse Disney was a block devoted towards toddlers and preschoolers, kind of like what you see with Nickelodeon when they had Nick Jr. And then you also have Vault Disney, which would air during the evenings and like the after dark hours. And Vault Disney would be a block devoted to a lot of the really older content, especially during Walt Disney's heyday with some of their black and white cartoon shorts and even some of their other canceled programs like the Ink and Paint Club, Zorro, the Mickey Mouse Club. Notable shows that were featured on the Vault Disney block. And then it wasn't until 1998 where Disney would also introduce a third block, which would air during the afternoon and the early evening hours, which would be called Zoog Disney. Now, Zoog Disney is actually a block that was centered around the emphasis on the computers and the internet. And you would have these sorts of cartoon characters interacting with the viewers, encouraging them to go online and surf the web, play some of the online games that's featured on the Disney Channel webpage. So there was a lot of emphasis on, the emphasis on technology, especially in the late 90s during the dot-com boom period where a lot of households were starting to have access towards computers and, specifically the internet. But more like softwares like America Online would often be advertised in various commercial breaks. And you even had chat rooms and even message forums were starting to become come into existence at this time. Yeah, so Zoog Disney kind of emphasized on counterculture as to what was relevant. Especially like I discussed about the internet and the dot-com boom period in the late 90s. And even during the introduction of Zoog Disney, you also have the introduction of a set of half-hour original programs. Now, these original programs, the first one that they produced was called Flash Forward, which would launch the careers of actors like Joel State from Firefly and Ben Foster from Alpha Dog, Contraband, Bang Bang You're Dead. So that was clearly the first Disney Channel original program that aired in 1995. Now, it wasn't until 1998 where Disney Channel really went full force with their original content. In 98, you also have the introduction of the famous Jet Jackson. The Jersey, just about a couple months after that. Going Wild with Jeff Corwin, Bug Juice, and as well as this particular show that I'm already discussing in this video, So Weird. So Weird kind of embraced some of the use of the internet, especially with the lead protagonist V, who creates this So Weird webpage, just recording some information that she discovered while encountering all sorts of paranormal activities and sharing it to some of her other followers. So she would also have these message forums and even a chat room to discuss some of the, some of the things that she's discovered, especially with some of the friends that she meets. So that would be a common theme also for the show, is that you would see some of these characters that would appear in one episode. Fiona starts to establish some sort of friendship between her and the character of the week, so they would often exchange contacts with the character and they would still keep in touch while on the road. Yeah, so that's pretty much a common theme for that show. Now, I didn't really get into this show like when So Weird premiered in '99. I mean, I had no access to the Disney Channel. So I did remember like it was still kind of making that transition because I didn't have access because it's Disney Channel was still going through a transitional phase, especially since it was still a premium part of a premium cable package. So I had to wait just about a year later in around the spring of 2000. So I remember just scrolling around the TV channels, just wondering what shows were on, especially with basic cable, since that was really the best I could go through. I mean, there wasn't like we didn't have like uh, dish satellite or anything where we could like watch 1,000 channels, unlike today. But back then, the best that we got was the basic cable package. So it would be like somewhere along the lines of Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, USA, TNT. So then I just randomly scrolled over to the Disney Channel, expecting to see this blank screen. But what I got instead, the first thing that popped up on my screen on Disney Channel when I watched it was the 1996 made-for-TV movie Gunther and the Paper Brigade, which notably guest starred Robert Englund, who you may know him from Nightmare on Elm Street. So I know some people might ask, like, what does this have to do with So Weird, you ask? So yeah, one of the earliest I can remember out So Weird was the episode where Fee ends up turning into a dog. Because I remember they actually advertised that episode pretty heavily at that time, and it seems to be like one of the more infamous episodes of the show. I did not get into the show until like towards the end of the second season, like just about when they were going to season three, with the cast changes and whatnot. So like Fiona left the show, she got replaced by Alex Johnson, who played Annie Thalen. Who, getting back to the subject here, so I started getting into this show just shy from the end of the second season. The earliest commercial I remember mentioning was Shelter, but the first full episode I think I could remember was Encore, which was actually a semi recap show where Molly was announcing that she was going to quit touring and start producing a record album, which was kind of a weird timing since when I started getting the show, it's like they're just showing highlights of all the events that transpired in seasons 1 and 2. So, kind of got a little bit spoiled there, but it because because they were still showing reruns, so I was able to watch it during the weekends, especially now that I realized that I was able to have access to the Disney Channel. So I started watching it just about August because I remember they were also hyping up the third season and how they were gonna pass the torch, having Fee pass the torch over to Annie. So I did remember by this point they were starting to air the show on a day-to-day basis as opposed to just being exclusive to the weekends or having to only air it once a week. But yeah, so they were starting to branch out the show in the weekdays and pretty much every day on the Disney Channel by this point. Yeah, so some of the other episodes I remember watching when it was on Disney Channel was Family Reunion, Nightmare, Will o' the Wisp, Escape. I'm thinking about another episode. I think it was the episode Listen. The aliens were trying to contact Fiona, but they could where these group of people were able to have the ability to communicate telepathically through the wheat crops. Yeah, so I remember watching that episode. Rambling aside, we're gonna kind of go straight to the full story, or at least some of the key important stories that I'm also gonna discuss about. Going through some of the episodes and episodes I like, or episodes that sort of have a key important moment that would carry on throughout the next course of episodes. So Weird starts off with a pilot episode which is called Family Reunion. Now, what's common with this show, especially in each episode, is that they would open up with a monologue. You would have the lead character in the first two seasons, Fee, and season 3 when Annie took over. So Fee in seasons 1 and 2, she would discuss about something that happened long ago, correlating into what she encountered in that particular episode and how that connects to what's going on in each episode. It's like in this episode, what happened here is that there's a spirit of a boy who was separated from his family, and this was actually from this shipwreck that happened long ago, I believe, like around World War II time. So this boy ends up getting separated from his family, and Fiona actually comes across the spirit of this young boy in Chicago. So Molly was actually trying to practice her rehearsal in Chicago, and Fee actually comes across the spirit of this young boy. So Jack and Clue end up tagging along with Fee in the road, and Jack's kind of denying all this. It's like, come on, Fiona. He's like, you're crazy. It's like, you don't believe in this. I don't believe in this. It's like, you're just being crazy. It's like there's no such thing as spirits or ghosts or anything supernatural related. Just having that sort of mindset that he had. But nevertheless, he and Clue end up tagging along with Fee. And by the end of the episode, because the young boy's body wasn't cremated, so that's why his spirit's still roaming around. Um, yeah, so eventually they find a way to bury his body in the same grave site as his family that he was separated back in the day. Like when I was watching like one of those monologues, I thought for sure that these events actually happened a long time ago, but it turns out that this was all just all fictional. It's not necessarily what happened in real life. So I remember thinking that at the time I was watching So Weird. It's like Fiona, especially in the monologues, just talking about what happened such and such year ago, and um, I honestly thought at first it was all real. At first, I thought even if it wasn't, I thought the actress did a pretty good job selling that. Always thought that those monologues, especially in the beginning, were some of the incidents, like some of the really tragic incidents that would be brought up in these monologues just before the episode would begin. I always thought those things were actually legit, but it turns out that wasn't the case. Even though some of the urban legend stuff is, potentially made up, but as far as like whenever Fiona's talking about like something that happened, like such and such character ended up dying, man, that was just kind of took me off by surprise, I guess if you want to put it that. And even with this episode, especially with the Disney Channel show, like So Weird, it just kind of went balls to the wall, and especially in the earlier episodes. There's no laugh track. It's not a sitcom. I could tell you that. Just presented in a more serialized format. Characters aren't constantly making punchline and after punchline, expecting a laugh track in a way where were expected to actually laugh at that joke. Um, I mean, you didn't need all that. I mean, the show's not doesn't look necessarily too cheap. It's a reasonable budget, not too cheap in a way like where it's shot in the live studio audience. I mean, the show's single camera and filmed on location. So I thought that was one of the beauties, especially with a lot, with Disney Channel. It's kind of a lost art in terms of live action TV shows. But yeah, so I know like I said once again, I'm just trying my best not to come off a little too carried away with the uh, bitterness. But some of that still kind of applies though. Family Reunion, I thought that was a really brilliant written episode, even though it didn't necessarily feel like an actual pilot episode. Unlike most TV shows where they would introduce us with the characters and see who they're about, and then they would meet up with this other supporting character and they would establish some sort of bond and meet up with all these sorts of people and laying the groundwork for events that are about to come, like introducing maybe such and such antagonists and just basically being kind of like a building block to the main plot. But here it kind of felt like sort of like a spotlight, sort of a pilot episode to kind of test the waters to see if the show would be greenlit. Because that's normally what you have to do in order to get the show to air on an actual network is, really pitch off a pilot episode, see how it unfolds, and if the networks like it or network executives like it, then they would add more episodes and invest more money on that show. Yeah, so I thought Family Reunion was a pretty solid way to start off the show. Then we get to the second episode, which is called Website. Now, unlike Family Reunion, I do feel that Website is kind of an episode where you kind of feel like this is where they really started to really have an idea of where to go from here. So they actually introduced us to some of the showrunners like John Cooksey and Anne Marie Matheson. So they would be the showrunners for the first and the second season. So they start taking over with this episode. What happens here is that Fiona receives this anonymous email from this user, and this particular anonymous user happens to have this sort of foreshadowing of what's going to happen down the road for Fee and her family. Like something's going to happen, that where the tour bus is going to end up going through a head-on collision, and the anonymous email is warning Fee of what's going to happen down the road. Sort of like just like Final Destination. If anyone is familiar with the Final Destination trilogy or franchise, I know there's actually more than three movies of Final Destination, but yeah, that's basically kind of the formula or the trope behind this particular episode. Is that this Fee receives this anonymous email telling that Fee that something's going to happen and you have to stop it somehow. Well, it turns out that in that episode that it was that her father had something to do with it. They do successfully prevent themselves from actually going through a head-on collision. We even get to establish, properly a little more about the characters and, Fee's fascination of the paranormal. Jack's on and off conflict with Fee and um, butting heads here and there, especially throughout most of season one. Yeah, so if you watch some of the opening credits, you notice that there were some clips from this episode that were carried on from the footage from the opening credits of the show. So I actually thought that was pretty interesting there. The website, definitely really enjoyed this episode. I thought this could have been a really good way if this was the first episode. But as a matter of fact, this aired just alongside the first episode on the same night that So Weird premiered in January of '99. I thought website, it pretty much laid the groundwork for some of the plot, for the plot, what the show was going to be about. They actually eventually mentioned about Fee's father Rick here. A lot of that wouldn't be tackled until season two. Yeah, so that's pretty much website there. Third episode we have is called Memory. Now, this episode, when I first watched it, I had no idea what it was actually about because I do not remember watching this show when it was on the Disney Channel when I was watching on TV. So not even when Disney Channel was showing reruns of it pretty briefly, since it got limited airplay. What happened in this episode is that Fee and her family come across this small town, and it's very hot and humid, and somehow there was like this alien that crash sended on the small town. So because these citizens from these small towns actually discovered these aliens, they ended up erase their memories, including Fee and the family, and they're just having a hard time just trying to remember what exactly happened that day. And every time they just try to remember, it's like there's some sort of they start to get some sort of headache or sort of migraine, anything that's preventing them from remembering what happened that during the day when the aliens came in. So the rest of the family, or especially Fee, try to figure out what's going on, and it looked like they were getting closer to the truth. But just before Fee could get closer to the truth, it's like the spaceship's not there. It's like we can't contact, we can't get in touch with whoever's or whatever's going on. The episode ends where Fee and the rest of the characters just all have a blast in the swimming pool. It's like, what's the point of just stressing out about something that happened when we should just cool down and just have a blast, have a good time. Yeah, so that was pretty much memory in a nutshell. Hopefully, I actually discussed this the best that I can because I had to re-record this audio on several times. It's just very, um, I mean, for a kid show, it's actually very sophisticated. But yeah, this show was definitely, I would say, it was very ahead of its time in terms of the writing aspect. But yeah, so we actually got some pretty cool flashbacks from the intro of the episode where we see flashbacks of Molly and Rick when he was still alive, when while Fee and Jack were still little. So I thought that was actually very sweet. We got to see how Rick looked like, and they actually changed around Rick's appearance in the show, which I actually did not catch that, but you'll see like some like um, I know someone mentioned that they actually changed around Rick's appearance over the years. I can't really remember exactly how he looked like at the moment. Maybe I could post some pictures or show you something about the difference between how he looked like in like some of the earlier episodes, like sometime in season one, and then his appearance in like season two and three, so forth. At the time I watched this episode, I had no idea what it was about or why Fee and the rest of the gang are just so worried and they just didn't solve the problem there like they normally do in most of the other So Weird episodes. Like, I don't know, but yeah, this would actually lay the groundwork for what would have happened because uh, one of the writers for had they continue on to produce season three, basically what would have happened is that it would be revealed that the aliens were trying to contact Fee, but they ended up getting spotted by these civilians, so they had to like wipe everyone's memories in that town, including Fee's. And they would end up coming back or get mentioned again in Listen, where I was discussing about the wheat crops and how the aliens are able to communicate telepathically. And then you also had Roswell in that episode where Fee gets this alien sort of alien translator, where she could basically try to communicate her in a more fluent and understandable way. So they were gonna play a big part in the third season. Um, so I probably might get a little more into that too when we get to the second season. I might try to maybe split this up since this video is going a lot longer than expected. So I'll probably like split this into maybe two or three parts. So we'll have to see how long this video will go, especially with all this rambling. I try to be as accurate and clear as I possibly can. So then we get to, I'm probably going to skip around a couple episodes, not necessarily saying that they were bad episodes, but some of the episodes where I feel that the show kept I'm getting my words mixed up here, but I'm gonna skip around some episodes since not because they're bad episodes, but just more where it kind of captures the show's strength. There was an episode which was called Rebecca. Now Rebecca centers around the character of the same episode title, who happens to be Molly's childhood friend. Now Molly's childhood friend ends up disappearing one day. Molly has no idea where she went. She hasn't left any sort of message or any sort of contact to Molly ever since. Like they haven't really kept in touch. But it turns out in that episode that Rebecca was actually almost a mere immortal. Who she's a lot older than she looks. So she only ages every 100 years. So she kind of goes through a different aging process compared to regular human beings where they constantly age year by year. But here with Rebecca, it's like she can only age a century. So that's kind of there's a secret behind Rebecca that she hasn't told to Molly. I think at the time when I did in my previous review, I mentioned that Rebecca died, that she was actually a Holy Spirit, but it turns out that Rebecca was actually an immortal, like someone of immortal, someone that could, that she would have still been alive after all these hundreds of years, and no one really realizes it. So I kind of got that wrong the first time around. So Rebecca, to correct from my discussion from my previous So Weird video, she was actually someone that was able to age like very slowly, but she's still looking very young and healthy despite being around for many generations. Yeah, so Molly actually wrote a song dedicated to her best friend, and just basically talking about, just basically in the song, just explaining about who she was and how much she meant to Molly, as well as just asking herself like, why didn't Rebecca had to go? It was a very heartfelt song. And you can actually listen to that song online. You could just type it up, the name of the song. Yeah, I remember watching that episode on a number of occasions. It was very, like I said, very heartfelt and very emotional. I actually noticed the actress because I was watching it. She looked kind of familiar. I mean, she wasn't necessarily a big time actress, but I did recognize her from the short lived sci fi TV show, which was Animorphs, which was based on the popular novel series from back in the day. Yeah, they also had Sean Ashmore on that show before he would go on to do the X-Men movies. Yeah, so I was actually like, man, she looked familiar or what? At least what I asked myself. But yeah, so she was on this episode, and this would sadly be her only appearance on the show. But however, she does get mentioned, or yeah, by especially since Fee keeps in touch with some of the characters that she encounters on the road, and they would actually another one of the characters that they probably would have brought back for season 3 had they not scrapped out the original storyline of Rick and the circumstances that happened surrounding his death. I would have been glad to see Rebecca come back in season 3. Yeah, so nevertheless, Rebecca, just a very emotionally driven episode. And then I'm actually getting these episodes mixed up, but just kind of backtracking a few episodes prior is the 7th episode, which is called Angel. Now, Angel, what happens here is that Fiona and her family are traveling in the tour bus, Ned's being the tour bus driver. So, he's driving on the bus, comes across this anonymous figure. It looks like to be a man that's standing in the middle of the road. Ned ends up crashing against a fence. Along the way, they meet up with a girl named Gabe, as well as her father. So, Gabe happens to possess this sort of ornament that's around her necklace, which actually appears to be a engraving of an angel. Fiona actually takes notice of it, that there may be some connections with the pendant as well as the spirit that Ned ended up stumbling upon while he was driving on the road. Jack also expresses interest in Gabe just as much as Gabe, expresses a bit of a love interest in Jack as well. Gabe actually, has the ornament, and she's, just talking about how the angel chose her, that she's ready to go through the light. So what happens is that instead of the angel choosing Gabe, he ends up choosing Fee instead. So Fee volunteers to go to the light. What happens is that Fee ends up passing out. So Jack's like very concerned. It's like, you're scaring me. What's going on here? By the end of the episode, Fiona receives this ornament off screen from Gabe, the same angel ornament that she had earlier in the episode. She hands it over to Jack. I guess the only minor nitpick I had with that episode is just when I was researching about the bone marrow transplant, I just had to ask myself, is like, how is it possible for Fee to even get a bone marrow transplant? Because you have to be like 18 years of age or older to qualify to earn a bone marrow transplant. So I just had to ask myself that because Fee was very young at the time. She was like 14. Um, so when her parents have a problem with that, especially with Molly or Jack, I don't know, but it's just one of those little tidbits. But I thought it was cool to see Fiona do a good deed, especially trying to keep Gabe healthy because she was a love interest to Jack. So they would have this sort of long distance relationship. Now, like Rebecca, Gabe, this would be her only appearance. They would still, mention about some of these one-off characters, and that's kind of one of the things I liked about the show is that, even though these characters only appear for one episode, it's not like they don't get mentioned again. Yeah, they would have brought her back as Jack's prom date because I actually read a Word document that I downloaded from the message forum that were basically talking about what would have happened if the original showrunners from the first two seasons were to stay put in season three, that they would have had Jack and Gabe have this sort of high school prom date. It's kind of one of those what could have been. They were always teasing about Jack and Annie getting together when, Jack had interest in Gabe, but then Jack stopped interacting with Gabe or just stopped, mentioning her, which was kind of like pretending everything that happened before just didn't exist. So, nevertheless, Angel just was a very terrific episode. Then the episode that proceeded after that was called Strangeling. I hope I pronounced that right. And in that episode, uh, Fee and her family meets up with Fee's aunt Melinda, who happens to theater where there's this play that's going on. Fee happens to use a spell book, just basically kind of messing around, just performing magic tricks with these twin sisters. What happens is that when Fee was using the book, she ends up unleashing a dragon, summoning a dragon from the book. So the dragon's actually lurking among the stage, and everyone's like terrified. And also in that episode, Jack and Clue ended up cosplaying as knights when they're in the dressing room. And interesting enough, in that episode, this would be one of the first mentions of Carrie, who is actually Clue's brother. And Carrie wouldn't be introduced until season two. This was actually one of the earlier signs where they mentioned a character that hasn't been introduced yet, but just a bit of foreshadowing. Yeah, so Carrie's actually in college at the time this episode's taking place. Yeah, Jack and Clue, they end up cosplaying as knights. Jack is informed from these little girls that there's a dragon on stage, and he has to stop it. So Jack volunteers. Jack doesn't even believe, because Jack is like, it doesn't even realize that that it was actually a dragon that he's fighting against. So he ends up volunteering anyways, and he successfully defeats the dragon as Fee chants a ritual spell that causes the dragon to go back into this book. And even at the end of the episode, her aunt Melinda hands over the spell book over to Fiona. And it turns out that Rick previously held the book at some point. Even though Rick had the book, it's like we aren't really sure exactly how exactly he got a hold of the book. Especially when you could tell like that facial expression that Molly had, especially towards the end of the episode, was like she had this sort of expression where she's kind of uncomfortable, especially reluctant on, with Fee and having the idea of having her possess the spell book that she had. It was actually basically going to be from Molly's parents. So it's in this episode. It turns out that Fee's family comes from a line of witches, particularly Molly's side of the family. So that's really my thoughts on the eighth episode, Strangeling. Then we fast forward over to now. Before I get to the season one finale, there was actually an episode that came out before that, which was the 12th episode called Lost. Now, Lost would actually guest star a young Kyla Pratt, who at the time I believe was doing Doctor Dolittle. In this episode, she plays this young girl. She portrays a anonymous email sender. So Fee ends up playing this sort of computer game one day, and then she comes across this email where this anonymous user was asking her that she needs help and that she wants to find her way home. Fiona isn't really sure who it is. And then Molly kind of tags along. It's like, "What are you doing?" And Fee's just willing to help this stranger out, but Molly at first doesn't really feel comfortable. After some bit of convincing, Molly agrees to help Fee try to track down the little girl. And it turns out that she happens to be under a coma, and she hasn't awoken in over a decade. Kyla Pratt's character is in another dimension. Like she's under, a deep sleep. She's in this sort of small town, which is kind of like an alternate universe of this small town where there's nobody around her, no one's in sight. She's doesn't really know where to go or what to do. Fee, Molly, and even also later the girl's family end up finding out, so they end up trying to help this little girl and try to find her way home. So Jack and Clue end up volunteering as well and planning out the coordinates as to where the girl should go. So there's a little bit of struggling whether or not the girl is gonna find her home, and there's some doubts along the way. Eventually, she ends up finding a way back home. Kyla Pratt's character ends up waking up from her coma, and basically she thanks Fiona and Molly and everyone else that was there that helped her along the way. Now, I guess the only complaint I had from this episode is like, how did the medical personnel not realize that there was some uh, electrical malfunction during the hospital beds? Normally when you're in a hospital, like there's like a heart rate monitor and there's a tube that's hooked in the wire, like you would normally see in a hospital, especially with the patient. How did they not realize that there was actually some sort of malfunction this whole time? That's kind of something I was asking myself. I'm not sure unless I might have missed something, or there might be a good explanation as how they did not know about it this whole until like recently. That's just kind of one thing I just had to scratch my head for a moment there. Yeah, so that's other than that, this was like a very tremendous episode, pretty heartfelt and filled with some bit of drama and suspense, and especially when it seemed like Kyla Pratt's character isn't gonna go back home and she's not gonna wake up from her deep sleep. But I thought they actually played a really good job at that, and especially with Kyla Pratt, especially in her earlier roles before she would do The Proud Family and One on One. So, nevertheless, a pretty cool episode. Definitely enjoyed it. Then we get to the season finale of season one, which is called Will o' the Wisp. Now, Will o' the Wisp, Fiona and their family, they're in the tour bus, and eventually they come across this ball of light. So everyone's figuring out like what it is exactly. Now, Fee, Jack, and Clue end up investigating on whatever paranormal occurrence is happening once again. So Jack ends up coming across this ball of light, and he gets sucked under the Wisp's trance. And this would be a phase where the Will o' the Wisp ends up taking over Jack's body. So Jack's starting to act out of character, just not acting like himself. He's just very cheerful and a bit of a mischievous, but more cheerful in front of his family. But Fiona's kind of like she knows what's up and what's going on. She basically did some research about Will o' the Wisp. The Wisp possessing Jack ends up freezing time and sending Fee over to his own dimension. And and for Fee to get out of that dimension, Jack. I was gonna say Jack, but the Will o' the Wisp that's possessing Jack has ends up making this sort of game where if Fee can't solve his riddle, which in turn is actually if you can't solve the name of the Will o' the Wisp would stay in Jack's body permanently. So Fiona agrees to his game, ends up using her laptop, but the Will o' the Wisp argues to Fee that she isn't able to use the laptop because it's cheating. Fee ends up using the laptop and argues that it wasn't part of your rules. It's not you never mentioned that I wasn't able to use the laptop to decipher your name. So just when the name just when they were starting to automatically scramble the name on the computer screen, Will o' the Wisp insists to Fee to stop doing this, try to play mind games to Fee. It's like, I know about your father and what happened that day, and Fee really wants to know what happened, to Rick, Fee's father, that is. Despite the Fee just almost nearly giving in to Will o' the Wisp, Fee's like, just insists not to know about it, and instead it's like the Will o' the Wisp's name is revealed. His name's Burkrew, and eventually Fee ends up going back to her own reality, where Fee's like everyone else is in the tour bus. Fiona and Jack actually got into an argument prior to, getting sent to another dimension. The episode ends with Fee and Jack hugging each other and comforting one another, coming to good terms overall. So that's pretty much the end of the episode and pretty much season one there. I really enjoyed this episode once again, especially with Jack's performance on the show. Or yeah, Jack, the actor that played Jack, I thought he did a pretty good job, especially as the Will o' the Wisp character. Just very jolly and a bit of a mischievous, and especially more cheerful and um, just over the top in a way. We get to see a little more bonding between Jack and Fee. Like when I was addressing about how the two siblings just can't seem to get along, there were times where Fee and Jack would have these sorts of words of wisdom and just really showcasing their caring and nurture for each other, which you would see throughout some of the episodes in season one, especially with the 11th episode. I can't remember the name of the episode exactly, but it was the episode where Jack and I believe it was Jack and Clue were playing baseball, and then like something happened where like this baseball ends up knocking a window off of this old man's house, and then like Fee and Clue ended up going to this other dimension where Clue ends up trying to grab the ball, and then like time freezes over, and then Fee ends up going to this someone's house and argues with this and keeps bickering with this elderly man. Yeah, that's kind of the episode where like Fee and Jack, when Fee got out of the house, it's like she was kind of really showcasing her, just making confessions to Jack, and just really showcasing her true feelings for him and how much, even though you're buttheads, like deep down inside, you're my brother. And it's not exactly how she says it, but it's kind of like a long dialogue. But it's pretty heartfelt. If you haven't watched that episode, highly recommend it, especially for those that are willing to get in the show, or people that for some of the viewers that watched So Weird growing up that haven't seen the show in a while. So I highly recommend you watch that. Pretty or touching for that matter. So yeah, like I said, this is pretty much my thoughts on the first season of season one. I thought this was a very good way to really start off the show. It took a while for the show to really find its footing, but once we get to season two, the storyline, as far as that's concerned, that's really where it, as far as the show really reaches its apex. So thank you for watching for this video. I will continue with my retrospective on So Weird with season 2 and maybe perhaps season 3, but we'll see how long that video goes. Yeah, so leave down your comments in the comment section below and stay tuned for season 2. So take care, and until next time, this is the GSTV reviewer signing out.